The night over the northern valley lay frozen in a stillness so complete that even the wind seemed afraid to disturb it. A silver moon hung low above the jagged ridgelines, suspended in a sky stripped of all warmth, as if time itself had grown reluctant to move forward. Beneath that unwavering moon, a lone grey wolf named Aru stood atop a snow-loaded outcrop, gazing down at a world drowned beneath winter's crushing grip. Aru was neither young nor old. His coat carried the scars of battles fought against elk hooves, rival males, and the hunger that stalked every wolf in this land. His ears twitched at each faint rustle in the valley, the distant cracking of ice on the river, the soft wingbeat of a snowy owl taking flight, the muffled movement of voles tunnelling beneath the snow. But none of this held his attention. His focus was fixed on the faint line of lights flickering far below on the valley's edge. Human lights. They had returned. Aru lowered his head, nostrils flaring. The smell reached him even through the cold. Gasoline fumes, wood smoke, metal, the harsh scent of strangers who had entered the valley after years of leaving it to the wolves and the deer and the storms. Their arrival meant danger, not just to him, but to the fragile balance of prey that the wolf pack depended on. The pack, or what remained of it. Aru had been the beta once, second only to the powerful alpha male, Rask. But after last winter's famine and the avalanche that killed 2 pups and separated the pack for nearly a month, nothing had gone back to the way it was. Hunger frays patience, cold breaks bonds. Wolves that once hunted shoulder to shoulder now kept wary distance, each unsure whether unity or solitude would bring survival. Aru remained loyal to the pack, but the pack now lived fractured, their territory shrinking, their prey moving deeper into the forest where snowdrifts reached a wolf's shoulders. A howl rose from the east ridge, sharp, high-pitched, anxious. Aru recognized the voice, Lyra, the young female who had recently left her natal den and followed Rask. Her cry carried urgency, not fear, but alertness. Something was happening in the valley. Aru descended the slope, paws sinking deep into powder. The snow muffled his steps, turning his movement into a ghost-like glide through a world of white. He passed through a narrow corridor of pines, heavy with so much snow that entire branches broke under the weight. His breath left short bursts of mist, the cold bit into his pads, but he ignored it. When he reached the tree line, he saw Lyra standing on a frozen boulder, tail stiff, ears locked forward. Below her, a herd of elk clustered nervously, their silhouettes dark against the moonlit plain. But the elk were not watching wolves. Their heads pointed towards something else, something near the human lights. Aru moved beside Lyra. She flicked her ears in greeting, but her gaze remained fixed. A shape lay collapsed in the snow just beyond the herd, half covered by drifting powder. At first, Aru thought it was a dead elk, wounded during the migration, but when the wind shifted, he caught it, an unmistakable scent. Human. A human alone on the plain was no ordinary occurrence. Wolves avoided people whenever possible, but winter made everything unpredictable. Humans grew desperate, reckless. Sometimes they chased elk in illegal hunts, sometimes they crossed the valley looking for lost livestock, and sometimes they simply made mistakes in a land that did not tolerate mistakes. Aru advanced slowly, Lyra following but keeping distance. As they approached the fallen human, the elk herd snorted and scattered, hooves thundering across ice in chaotic retreat. The human was a young man, barely older than 20. His jacket was torn across the shoulder, soaked in blood that had frozen into dark crusts. A hunting rifle lay beside him, untouched by his hands. He had dropped it before collapsing. His breaths came shallow, uneven. Frost had formed on the edges of his eyelashes. Aru circled the human, not with hunger, but with instinctive caution. Wolves rarely attacked the helpless unless starving beyond rational thought. Aru was hungry, but not desperate. He lowered his nose to the snow, sniffing deeply. The man's scent carried something else beneath the blood: fear, exhaustion, and a faint hint of smoke. Lyra whined softly. Aru lifted his head and stared toward the valley's lights. They flickered wildly now, dozens of them. Voices carried faintly through the frozen air. Search party. Humans were looking for the missing man, but they were far away. Too far, and the temperature was dropping fast. Aru backed away, unsure of what instinct demanded of him. Wolves were not rescuers, but neither were they executioners without cause. The man posed no immediate threat, but his presence here was dangerous for all. Wounded humans meant search teams, snowmobiles, noise, traps, disruption. Before he made a decision, a distant rumble cut through the valley. A snowmobile. Aru's ears snapped toward the sound. A single rider approached from the northwest, weaving through the drifts. But something was wrong. He was moving erratically, the machine fishtailing, engine struggling. As he drew closer, Aru saw the danger. The snowmobile was heading straight for thin ice on the river. The rider didn't know. The wolves did. Lyra barked sharply, darting forward, then back, signaling danger the way she would warn the pack near a broken cliff. Aru joined her, pacing, growling low, but the human could not understand. He sped toward the river, the machine vibrating under him. When the snowmobile hit the weak patch, the ice groaned loudly, louder than any sound the valley had made all night. The front of the machine shattered through. The rider screamed as he plunged forward, machine sinking beneath him. Dark water surged into the gap, sucking everything downward. Aru bounded toward the bank, stopping only when the ice trembled beneath his own weight. The rider thrashed, fighting the pull of the current. His gloved hands clawed at the jagged edges of the ice, but each attempt only widened the fissure. The valley echoed with his cries. The moon hung motionless, white and cold. Humans were not the only ones who reacted. A pack howl broke from the western ridge. Rask and the others. They had heard the ice break. They were coming. Aru looked between the drowning man and the injured one on the snowbank. 2 humans. 2 catastrophes. 1 night. The wolves gathered moments later, forming silhouettes against the moonlit ridgeline. Their breath steamed. Their eyes gleamed. Rask approached Aru with stiff posture, demanding explanation. Aru stepped aside, revealing the wounded human near the elk path and the chaos unfolding on the river. Rask growled, not at Aru, but at the situation itself. Wolves did not save humans, but wolves understood danger, territory, disruption. If the search parties flooded the valley tomorrow, the wolves would lose hunting grounds. They would be driven higher into the mountain where prey was scarce. Aru let out a short, deliberate bark. Not to defend the humans, but to defend the valley. Rask turned toward the drowning man and threw back his head in a deep, rolling howl, summoning the rest of the pack. Together they spread across the riverbank, their bodies blocking the thin ice spots, forcing the snowmobile rider to grab onto a thicker edge where the ice still held. The man coughed, gasped, pulled himself up, shivering violently. He survived because the wolves forced him to the only safe path. Meanwhile, Aru approached the wounded human on the slope. The man's eyes fluttered open at the sound of footsteps. He saw Aru and froze, lips trembling. Aru stared back. No malice. No hunger, only consideration. Then he threw his head upward and howled, a long deep note that carried across the valley. Not a hunting call, not a territorial threat. A signal. Searchlights shifted. Voices rose. The humans heard the howl and converged toward it. Snowmobiles, flashlights, boots, all moved in Aru's direction. The wolves vanished into the tree line before the first rescuers arrived. Minutes later, the humans found both men, one unconscious on the ground, the other half frozen by the river. They shouted to each other, relief breaking through the cold. But the rescuers would never know the truth, that the wolves had guided them. From the ridge, Aru watched them load the injured men onto stretchers. Snowflakes drifted around him like drifting ash. His pack gathered behind him, Lyra, Rask, and the others, all silent. The moon still hung in the sky, unmoving. Perhaps it refused to move because the valley had not yet decided what it would become. Aru lowered his head and trotted back into the forest, the pack flowing behind him like shadows stitched to the snow. Tonight the wolves had chosen balance. Tomorrow the valley would choose its own verdict, and the moon, indifferent and eternal, would keep watching, just as the wolf did. Dawn did not come quickly to the valley. It crawled over the ridges like a wounded animal, slow and shivering, turning the black sky into a muted blue that felt colder than the night itself. The storm clouds had cleared, leaving a sharp brightness that stung the eyes. Every branch, every rock, every blade of frozen grass glittered beneath a fresh crust of frost, as though the world had been dipped in glass. Aru woke curled beneath a leaning pine, snow piled on his back like a white blanket. Around him lay the pack. Lyra, tucked close for warmth. 2 younger males, twitching in their sleep. And Rask, whose breath came in deep, measured pulses. The alpha had not slept well. Aru could sense it. The events of the previous night had left a tension hanging over the wolves, a tension deeper than hunger or cold. Humans had come too close, and humans would come again. Aru rose, shaking snow from his fur. His ribs showed faintly under his winter coat, a reminder that even wolves were tested by the deep winter. He sniffed the air. The wind carried 3 scents that mattered: elk, far to the east, fox, nearby, and humans, faint but present. The search teams had not left the valley after the rescue. Their machines still lingered, their boots trampling trails through the untouched snow. Lyra approached him, tail low but wagging. She brushed her nose against his cheek, a small gesture that reminded him she trusted him. Aru nudged her back gently. She was one of the few who still saw him as a leader despite losing his place to Rask. Rask himself stretched, stiff and slow. His eyes found Aru immediately, and for a moment the air between them tightened. Not hostile, simply the silent exchange of 2 wolves who understood that decisions made today could decide the pack's fate for the rest of winter. The elk herd needed to be hunted soon. The valley was thinning. The deep snows were starving everything, wolves and prey alike, but the humans' presence made hunting dangerous. The elk had moved closer to treacherous slopes, avoiding the valley floor where engines and voices echoed. That meant wolves would have to risk a chase across cliffs where one wrong step could send a wolf plunging dozens of meters into rock. Rask stepped forward, sniffed the air, then let out a short grunt. It was not a question, it was a command. Aru, Lyra, and the 2 young males followed. They moved west, their paws sinking into fresh powder. The sun rose sluggishly, unable to cast warmth. Their breaths formed clouds that floated briefly before shattering into sparks of frost. When they reached the slope overlooking the frozen river, Aru halted. The snowmobile tracks from the night before cut deep scars into the snow. Broken ice fragments still lay scattered along the riverbank. The scent of human fear still lingered faintly. The drowning man had survived, but he had left something behind, something that troubled Aru more than any noise or scent. A new boundary. Humans had crossed into the Wolf Valley, and in doing so, they had reopened an old wound in the land. Lyra sniffed the tracks and whimpered. She disliked the smell of gasoline. It burned her nose, made her uncertain. Aru nudged her shoulder gently, grounding her. Rask growled low, urging the pack onward. They skirted the river, choosing the higher path where the snow was thinner and easier to cross. The elk scent grew stronger. Aru picked up speed, weaving between bare birch trunks. His muscles warmed with motion, the ache of hunger sharpening his senses. Finally, at the edge of a clearing, they found the herd. 20 elk stood in a tight cluster, their bodies steaming gently in the morning cold. A dominant bull stood near the center, his antlers half shed, heavy and dangerous. The herd was restless, stamping the snow with anxiety. They sensed the wolves long before seeing them. Rask signaled silently with a jerk of his head. Aru sprinted left, Lyra bolted to the right, and the younger males circled wide. The pack fanned out like shadows stretching across the white. Their breath huffed in rhythmic bursts. Snow flew beneath their paws. The elk panicked. The herd broke apart, splitting into two groups. Aru targeted the smaller group, 3 cows and a yearling. He lunged forward, cutting off their escape route. Lyra matched his movements perfectly, flanking the herd and pushing the yearling into open ground. The chase thundered across the snow. Elk hooves cracked ice. Wolf paws pounded behind them. The world narrowed into motion, swift, brutal, beautiful. But the humans ruined everything. A distant gunshot shattered the valley's fragile silence. The elk flinched and veered sharply. Lyra stumbled. Aru skidded to a halt, heart hammering. Rask howled, furious, warning the pack to fall back. The wolves retreated into the trees as human voices grew louder. The search teams had begun firing warning shots into the air, hoping to scare off predators from the area. They knew wolves prowled here. They didn't want to kill them. Most human laws forbade it, but they also didn't want to lose the rescued men to another disaster. The wolves regrouped in the shadows, panting, exhausted, and hungrier than before. Lyra limped slightly. Aru immediately inspected her leg. It was only bruised, not broken. She leaned against him for stability. Rask snarled at the human's direction, but did not attack. Even he was not reckless enough to challenge men armed with rifles. The hunt was lost, and the valley grew colder. Hours passed. Snow began falling again, not lightly, but in heavy sheets that stacked quickly on branches and rocks. The sky turned white, swallowing the horizon. The wolves returned to their den area, their bellies empty, their spirits strained. That night, Aru could not sleep. He sat beneath the same pine as before, watching the valley filled with searchlights that crawled like insects across the snow. The moon rose again, pale, distant, unmoving, as though it too feared to interfere with the land's suffering. Aru's heart pulsed with a confusion he couldn't name. Wolves did not question fate. They adapted, they endured. But this winter felt different, as if the valley itself were being pulled apart by invisible threads tugged by humans, storms, hunger, and old instincts. A branch snapped behind him. Rask approached. The alpha stopped beside Aru, their breath mingling in the frigid air. Rask's eyes glowed with a mixture of challenge and something Aru had not seen before. Uncertainty. He nudged Aru's shoulder, hard at first, then softer. A gesture not of dominance, a gesture of acknowledgement. The pack needed 2 leaders now, one to enforce strength, one to understand change. Aru bowed his head, accepting the unspoken pact. Below them, the valley lights flickered erratically as the search teams prepared to leave. Their machines groaned to life, their shouts echoed faintly. The humans would depart soon, but they would return again, more frequently each season, and the wolves would be forced to face that new reality. Aru lifted his head toward the moon. It still refused to move. Maybe it stayed still because someone had to. Maybe the valley needed at least one constant. Aru exhaled slowly, the frost from his breath drifting upward like a ghost. Tomorrow, the pack would hunt again. Tomorrow, the balance would shift again. Tomorrow, the valley would decide whether it belonged to humans or to the wolves who watched it through eyes older than memory. And Aru would be ready.